Everybody, welcome to this edition of Brilliant But Lazy. I am your host, Alan Cram, and once again, Josh Howell was unable to make it to um, the party. Just in true D&D fashion, we put the call out there, and part of the party didn't show. But joining me from Victims and Villians is our editor in chief and uh, role playing game enthusiast, Cam Smith. Cam, welcome.
There we go. That's perfect. Thanks,
Yes.
Alan.
You are welcome. I'm happy to have you here. I think we've met several times over calls,
Yep.
but we've never podcasted together. So
We haven't.
This is
No.
gonna be fun. I think you're
Yeah,
like
I've done.
one of the few people in Victims I have not podcasted with yet. So
Man, we'll get this out of the way then.
yeah,
I think I've done 2 episodes with Josh total, and then Dan and I had done one like last year sometime that just wound up in the can that we never put out because he got really busy with buying a house. So, but yeah.
well, welcome to Brilliant But Lazy. Each month we take 2 visits to different things in pop culture that catch our eye that are outside the purview of other victim and villain shows. This week, our topic is if it'll come up. There we go. Dungeons and Dragons: Honor Among Thieves, the recently released Dungeons and Dragons movie starring Chris Pine, Michelle Rodriguez, and Hugh Grant, among others.
Among others. Yeah.
Yes. So I just want to start off with a little bit of a disclaimer before this. It's been a few weeks since I've seen this, even though the movie just came out this past weekend. I saw this 2.5 weeks ago for a Amazon Prime advanced screening because for our previous Brilliant But Lazy, I had to go see Shazam 2, and I did not want to go see that. And I saw the Amazon Dungeons and Dragons thing going. I was like, well, if I'm going to go to the movies anyway, I might as well see something I want to see. So I saw this a few weeks ago. So I might be a little bit rusty on details of the movie, but I still have like the notes and the key things I want to talk about the movie. And then I have a fun story about the end because they decided to have the heat cranked up to 12 in my theater. Like it was super hot. So I may or may not have missed about 20 minutes of the movie just from sleeping. But
Hopefully
so
that's all right.
to start us off, before we even start talking about the movie, tell us a little bit about your experience with role-playing games.
Sure. So I wrote a spoiler-free review for the main website last week, right? I think maybe I put it out maybe the day after Josh Berkey and I got back from watching the movie. And I sort of condensed everything down as much as I could, but I grew up on stories about fantasy. My dad, I think, read The Hobbit to me as the first ever book that he read to me. But he would tell stories about the campaigns and stuff that he used to run for his brothers and other friends like that when he was in college. So for me, Dungeons and Dragons is like it was sort of a mythical thing that like my dad would talk about because he talked about how, oh yeah, I did this whole adventure for my brothers because they rolled up two dwarf fighters that had 18 and whatever strength, which meant nothing to me for a really, really long time other than, oh yeah, Uncle Greg and Uncle Ken were really powerful dwarf fighters, I guess, and had a blast killing orcs, which was kind of the extent of my D&D knowledge for a long time. And then one day I found my dad's old books and read them probably cover to cover, which is not a very good way to go about reading a D&D source book typically, because there are a lot of numbers and stat blocks and confusing things if you're just going off of stories. But I had them up until I think maybe a year or two ago, and my dad was finally like, hey, do you have my old Advanced Dungeons and Dragons books? And I said, yes. And then he was like, I want those back. So so I
Okay.
took them to him. But I've moved from there to reading a lot of the Dungeons and Dragons 3.5 edition, which is what a lot of people, if you have encountered Dungeons and Dragons, you have probably done it either during the 3.5 edition or now during the 5th edition. Or you're one of those OG guys who like started on the red box Advanced Dungeons and Dragons way back in the 80s. I had the fortunate ability to read the AD&D books and then encountered 3.5, and the first game I ever actually played was in 3.5 when I was in college, before my resident assistant, my RA, I think his brother ran a game for us or something like that, and then did something in 4th edition, and it sort of opened my eyes to like, whoa, like, you mean I can play a character that I have come up with that fits in with all these rules, and like using dice can basically do crazy things, and from anything from like jumping on a dragon and riding it when it doesn't want to be ridden to cutting somebody in half, which is something I've only ever seen in movies, to like doing magic spells of whatever types. And from there just kind of turned into, I started playing weekly with friends in college, and then when we finished college, we hosted a game night at our house. I think every Tuesday we played 5th edition for a while, and then I got into a podcast called the Glass Cannon Podcast, which ran a game called Pathfinder, which has its roots in Dungeons and Dragons but is kind of its own thing, and have since started to sort of expand my view into all of the other types of systems that are out there, such that I actually haven't played Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition in probably 5 years.
Okay.
My main thing now is Pathfinder, and then there's a number of other systems that I find really interesting. So it was very interesting coming into the movie being like, I don't know a ton of lore things. I know what I remember from playing 5th edition and from reading various other things, and even from checking out various properties like the Drizzt Do'Urden books, which are set in the Dungeons and Dragons universe, and I think maybe have some interplay. I've seen 1 or 2 articles online that are like, hey, the folks that did the Dungeons and Dragons movie want to do a second one and maybe want to include stuff from that, which is kind of neat. But it's all stuff from like way outside of my purview. So I basically came into it and was like, I'm expecting this to either be like, it might be awful, like the 2000 movie supposedly was. I've actually never seen that. But given 3 of the people on the cast, I think this could be a pleasant surprise, and I don't really know what I'm in for.
Yeah. For me, my introduction to Dungeons and Dragons as a whole didn't come until the D&D episode of Community, where they all sit around the study room and play Dungeons and Dragons. An episode you can't get now because they pulled it off of streaming. That's why I have it on DVD. So that was my introduction to that, and that fascinated me. Like, okay, like, so I didn't realize like that this was a thing. I knew it was a thing in video games. I never knew about like D20s, and like that opened like D&D. I've watched rise in pop culture in popularity over the last few years to the point where we get this movie now. I've only ever played one role-playing game, and it was during quarantine. A friend of mine set up a Star Wars role-playing game, and I built up a character. He was he was a Rhodian like Greedo. He was he was a slicer, so he was good with tech, and I did not do well like with my rolls at all. So like at one point I had to like
Yeah.
try to deceive somebody and it failed. So I just ended up vomiting. Like the character ended up
Oh.
vomiting, and it kind of worked. And everyone's like, "That was like this is your first time. Like that was actually a good move, I guess."
That's funny.
To the point where years later I saw people at New York Comic Con, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I forgot we did that. Remember that time when you just started throwing up randomly?" So going into this movie, like I was excited for it based on the cast, but when I was at the advanced screening, I looked around and it's like all these Dungeon and Dragons parties are there. Like everyone there is with a group of people watching the movie, and
Yeah.
you could tell that they were all fans of Dungeons and Dragons. I was more excited for the directors of this because I'm a film nerd. John Francis Daley and Jonathan Goldstein directed one of my favorite movies of the last 5 years. Yeah, I think it still counts for 5 years. Game Night with Jason Bateman and Rachel McAdams. I think that movie is one of the best shot comedies in years. The cinematography in that's great. The direction is fantastic, and the sense of humor is fantastic throughout the whole film.
Sure.
And when they announced that they were going to be doing a Dungeons and Dragons movie, I was like, "Oh, that could work very well." I am very intrigued by that premise. So I went for the game night of it all, and was pleasantly surprised. Like
I'm gonna have to.
I really enjoyed it. Elements of the movie beyond the cast, and so yeah, if you have not seen Game Night, I cannot recommend it enough.
I'm sending it to myself in a phone message right now so that I do remember. Because John Francis Daley, I recognized the name of and was like, why do I know this? And it was after the movie in the parking lot that Josh and I were talking about it, and he goes, "Oh yeah, he's Sweets from Bones." And I went, "Oh, that's why I know that guy."
And
cool.
And he was also on Freaks and Geeks. He played Sam on Freaks and Geeks, to the point where he got his other friends from Freaks and Geeks to come in and do a D&D promo for the movie where they're all
fun.
grown up
Fun.
playing D&D.
Yeah.
So, and they make jokes about, "You think they'll ever make this a movie?" And he's like, "I don't know." So,
That's funny.
so the movie itself is pretty much sets you up with a party of the characters you would actually have in a game of D&D. So you've got a bard, you've got a barbarian. I don't want to like say the wrong thing. So, what are the typical roles in a party for D&D that the movie fills out? Because it feels like it fills out the whole party.
So your classic adventuring party, and this was something that was interesting to me. Your classic adventuring party is probably a fighter, a cleric, somebody to heal, a wizard, or just a magic user in general, and then a cleric. Did I say cleric twice?
Yes, I think so.
I did. Or a rogue. That's
Okay.
the one I meant. Would be your fourth. So you kind of have somebody that can deal damage, the fighter. You have somebody that can kind of patch everybody else up, the cleric, but also is able to kind of off tank, kind of also be a damage dealer if necessary. You have a magic user who can just do whatever magic stuff is necessary, and then you have the rogue who can do everything, probably from be the face of the party to just handle whatever skills may need to come up, stuff like that. Honor Among Thieves takes a slightly different tact. So the original, the kind of original party that you have is Edgin the Bard, Holger the Barbarian. So you have a fighter, you have a face. Hugh Grant's character, whose name I don't remember, who's playing a con man rogue, Forge. Thank you.
Yes.
Who is also kind of a face character, and actually you don't really see him do much like classically roguish things other than kind of just be out for himself. And then you have Simon, who is kind of the magic user, that in that classic capability, but he's playing a sorcerer. And then in that first party, you also have this lady Sophina, who is a wizard, who's another type of magic user.
Yeah.
And after whatever happens when they're coming back, then you have Edgin and Holga who grab Simon, and then they pick up is it Doric, who is a druid. And an interesting thing, an interesting approach that D&D, that this movie does, Honor Among Thieves, is the druid is not playing a typical druid role.
Okay.
Your normal druid is probably going to be more spell focused, with sort of wild shaping being kind of an afterthought. But with Doric's character, they brought it far more to the front, and were like, this is a cool feature of a druid, which it is, that she can change into various things, and we can use that to, sneak around or take everybody's focus, because she turns into this big owlbear, which is a small point of contention. I believe rules as written, druids can't become owlbears, which is kind of disappointing, especially after the movie. And I think maybe Dungeons and Dragons is gonna like adjust that so that they can now, because that's kind of a really cool moment.
Yeah.
And then you also have randomly, sort of in the middle there, you have Paige as Zenka the paladin. And the thing that really stuck out at me is like, so paladins are tanky. They can fight a lot. They can do some healing stuff. They're generally like very good dudes. So he fits all of those. So you have all of the like, you still have most of the classic roles covered for a adventuring party. What you don't have is that healer, like a consistent cleric sort of figure, but you don't need one in Honor Amongst Thieves because of the approach that they're taking to storytelling. You don't need to have that one guy that makes sure everybody's, back up and ready to go for the next fight, because movie storytelling works differently from tabletop role-playing storytelling. But one of the really cool things with each one of those people is all seven, I think there's seven, like every single one of those seven people fit trope-wise their role incredibly well. Just from somebody that has put a lot of time into fantasy role-playing, specifically 5th edition to a lesser extent, but just fantasy role-playing in general, like each one of those people plays that class pretty accurately.
Yeah. Would you say that Chris Pine's character Edgin is the rogue then?
There is an aspect to that, and the only thing that like really makes him a shoo-in for the bard, besides the loot, is the like very key moment where he's like, yeah, we all suck, like, and especially where we are right now, like I suck most of all, and like turns that moment into like the big like inspirational speech that like, well, if you're gonna leave, like I'm gonna keep doing this because I have to keep doing this. And the bard really winds up being responsible for kind of the party morale, and usually, at least in terms of your party mechanics, like a bard and a rogue are gonna fit similar spaces in a party. So it doesn't really hurt them when Forge drops out and leaves Edgin kind of as that main factor of, I have to make the plans, I have to kind of bring everybody together. They sort of both function in that role normally anyway. A rogue's the main difference being that a rogue is probably going to mostly be based around feats of dexterity and like slipping into places they're not really supposed to be and not getting caught. While the bard is like, no, I'll get caught. I'll just, hey, look over there, distraction and stuff of that nature, which I think they pull off really well.
I feel like if I ever play D&D, I'm gonna have to go with a bard then, because that seems like the most fun to me. But I feel like after this movie, a lot of people can be like, "Yeah, I'm gonna be like Chris Pine."
Mm-hmm.
So I don't want to go with that crowd necessarily, but at the same time, like, don't care. That's kind of what I want to do.
Yeah. It's interesting because you need your Michelle Rodriguez character that can clean up when your Chris Pine shenanigans get you in trouble. You need your Simon. I don't remember what his actor's name is. You need that guy who can do something crazy like flip the gravity in a place to just like catch everybody off guard.
Yeah.
It's fun.
Simon's played by Justice Smith.
That's right, Justice
from
Smith, yeah.
Detective Pikachu.
It was what was fun for me was going. Hugh Grant is going to be fantastic as his role. Michelle Rodriguez, I know, can do what she's going to do. Chris Pine even is great at his role. I don't know anything about these other three, and being very pleasantly surprised that they just like nailed it.
Simon was the one that I was kind of iffy on. I was like, I don't know. I didn't like him in Jurassic World. He's fine in Detective Pikachu. Sophia Lillis, who plays Doric, I know her from a bunch of stuff, like It. So I was excited to see what she did with this. It was nice to see her in like kind of a bigger role, because it's been a while since I've seen her in anything. But Hugh Grant's on like kind of a renaissance, like between this and Glass Onion and the really weird interview at the Oscars. I don't know if you saw that, but
I didn't.
Yeah, it's very bizarre. He was interviewed by Ashley Graham on the red carpet, and she just asked the dumbest questions. Like the most bizarre, I don't want to say they're dumb, but just like the out of left field questions. Like, what are you wearing? He's like, I'm wearing a suit. Like, I'm not wearing a specially made dress or anything.
Right.
And he kind of like got like he could tell it was awkward, so he just kind of leaned into it. And like he was the top headline before the award show even started, and he wasn't even nominated for anything.
He just brings the charm, which is Hugh Grant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Michelle Rodriguez brings the potatoes. So I don't know if you I don't know if you saw that Regal Theaters was doing a promotion where if you brought a potato, you got into the movie for free in certain locations.
That's really funny.
Yeah.
The one that I had seen was that if you go to certain places, you can get a popcorn bucket that looks like a D20, which is kind of fun. I don't know if the video of this is going anywhere, but I have like a massive D20 that just sits on my desk.
Nice.
So it's kind of fun to see them kind of lean into the movie merchandising like that a degree, because there's no dice anywhere in the film.
There's not.
It's just rooted in tabletop.
Yeah. I saw the popcorn buckets, and I keep seeing videos of people like, who would spend $35 on a popcorn bucket shaped like a D20? Like me, I bought it.
Listen, nerds have paid more for less.
Yeah, exactly. If I had a decent AMC theater near me, I would have gotten it too. But when I went to see it, it was beforehand and they didn't have them yet. So they had signs up saying that the D&D popcorn combo is not available at this time. I was like, that's a bummer. No.
Yeah. One of my so I'm in two different role-playing groups. I sit at two different tables, so to speak. One of them on Sundays and one of them on Tuesdays, and I believe one of the Tuesday people is going tomorrow. No, Friday. He's going Friday with his girlfriend to watch the movie. And like the popcorn buckets, I think, are already sold out where he lives in Georgia. So it's interesting that, like, you know, if you didn't jump on it immediately, like, tough, it's gone.
That's how
we're that into it.
That's how it's been with the popcorn bucket releases. Because I remember for Thor: Love and Thunder, because that's still a movie that happened, even if people want to forget it. They had the Mjolnir buckets.
I never saw it.
Yeah.
I didn't.
They had the Mjolnir buckets, and they were starting to sell for a lot. AMC, I think, has been doing really good with different popcorn buckets for
Yeah,
people to get, and then they do sell out fast because they become collectibles. The Batman
sure.
cowl that they had last year was
Mm.
another one. Um,
See,
but
the piece that I really enjoy about being part of Victims and Villains is like I enjoy movies, but I don't love movies like you and Josh Berkey do.
yeah,
Like if not for the fact that like every once in a while you guys are like, "Hey, come chat about this movie with me," and I go see it, like I never wind up in a theater. So I don't know that there was a Batman cowl popcorn thing, which is a fantastic idea
oh yeah,
potentially. But like, yeah.
yeah. It's one of those things. If you don't pay attention to it, like you just miss out.
Mhm.
But so that one of the things I think makes this movie stand out from its predecessor that came out in 2000 with Jeremy Irons is this very much leans into the comedy aspect of everything.
Yeah, it
Um,
does.
and I've seen a lot of discourse online about that's what D&D is. Like it's not going to be all high fantasy and action and
Yep.
adventure. It's going to be chaos. And that's what this movie does fairly well. Was there any moments of that chaos in this that stood out to you as entertaining or off-putting or anything like that?
Not off-putting. There's definite moments that like I looked at like if I really think about it, the experience of sitting at the table is probably like 40% ish like being very into the combat and the role play, and maybe 20% being like I want the treasure, and the remaining percentage is like I just want to make my friends laugh. Um, so one of the characters that I've been playing for a little while is a little deaf deaf halfling ranger named Farley, and the whole purpose with the character was like I I enjoy role playing to a certain degree, but like the improv potential for my character can read lips but not tone is amazing. When you can just be like, I know exactly what you just said, but I don't know how you said it. So the like suggestion of we're gonna go do X, and it's completely sarcastic, but your character takes it and goes, yeah, okay, we're gonna go do that, and then like goes to seriously do it, and somebody's like, hold on, you're about to threaten this guy, and it's like, yeah, isn't that what we just decided to do?
Yeah.
um so there's like moments that stood out to me simply because they made Josh laugh. Like Josh Berkey has never ever played a tabletop role playing game, as far as I know. That's Captain Nostalgia for
Yeah.
anybody that listens to any of our other shows or the Shazam episode.
Yeah.
And I've been after him to try and get him to play, but like the moment when the guy in the bar is looking across at Holga and Edgin and like assumes they're together. And Holga says something about, oh no, that guy, like his lips are too big or something like that. And she makes an offhand comment about his lips, and like Chris Pine's character continues and then backtracks and goes, wait, what's wrong with my lips? And she's like, they're too big for your face. Um, like moments like that where like there's just offhanded comments that just happen at the table, like that's authentic. Where you can like you're just playing your character and you derail the whole scene because of something about your character that you just enjoy and you like lean into, and somebody else wasn't expecting it, or can create this really funny back and forth. My Tuesday game, for a little while I was playing a dwarven paladin, and the guy that was in Georgia was unhappy with his character, brought in a different one. He was playing a goblin monk raised by dwarves, which is kind of wild. And in Pathfinder, at least, goblins are terrified of dogs and horses.
Okay.
And we got told that we had to transport a bunch of stuff from point A to point B in a horse-drawn carriage. And his character immediately is just like, the horses? That you're not gonna go near the horses, are you? And just like leaned into this whole like, I'm so afraid of these horses that I'm gonna walk the whole way, because riding with them, they might turn around and decide to eat me.
Yeah.
And that just irrationality of like, I just decided to put that into my character and bring that to the table and just improv with that is amazing. It's the reason I think Justice Smith's portrayal of Simon is so good is he's a sorcerer who's grappling with the fact that everybody else is kind of like, nah, he's a bad sorcerer. And he's like, yeah, I guess I'm a bad sorcerer, but I have all this potential. I shouldn't be a bad sorcerer. And it's really just a self-confidence issue where the player is going, I have all these spells actually available to me, but it's funnier if I'm not good at them.
Yeah.
Or I'm trying to do one thing and I mess up and I do something else. And you can lean into that potential for chaos, like you said, in just a very fun way.
One of the scenes with the chaos that I had seen in advertising for the movie beforehand was the asking the dead bodies 3 questions.
Ah, that's so perfect.
Um,
One of the people that my dad played with way back when was a guy that I worked in tech support for a seminary for a little while, and he'd been a church planter in Australia and came back to the US and got brought in to be one of the guys that goes to various schools and tries to like get new students. He's like a recruiter of sorts, and the guy loves puns, loves wordplay, etc. And once I heard the story that my dad told me, it all clicked with him. But he's the poster child for that DM who's like, you have 5 questions. And you go, okay, well, so I have 5 questions, right? And then he answers as the corpse, yes. Like, that's perfect. That happens.
yeah.
Like, anything a DM can absolutely do to just, like, take away as many of those potential things as possible, because it winds up being very funny. Genies, especially in the world of Dungeons and Dragons, are notorious for, like, you need to be very careful and legalistic with what you wish for, because if they can, they will try to screw you out of your wishes, because those are very powerful and you have a limited amount. The unrealistic part of that scene is actually the fact that they can take that magic item and do it multiple times over and over and over again. If it was a real Dungeons and Dragons campaign, you'd maybe have one use of it on one corpse, and now you're screwed.
Yeah. And that's
So-
that's kind of what I expected the movie to do, is just they have a little one corpse and they mess it up and then they're screwed.
Mhm.
But then they
Yeah.
just kept going with it. And I was like, oh, okay. And it just kept getting funnier and funnier.
It wound up like really paying off. But yeah, that was a really funny moment where
Yeah.
I had seen that and was like, oh my goodness, this is perfect. Because I have a small group of guys who have never played anything before that I'm running the Pathfinder 2nd Edition beginner box for. And I intentionally picked this group of guys because they're all people that have a really good sense of play, where it's like, I can throw stuff at you and you'll run with it. You've never played this before, but you're going to have fun with it. One of the example being, there's a guy who's just decided he's playing the fighter, and everything he kills, he licks his weapon blade after. And it's resulted in a funny moment from he accidentally poisoned himself when he killed a spider to he killed a skeleton, licked it, and I was like, it's really dusty. And he proceeded to have a in-person coughing fit for about 2 minutes, which cracked everybody else at the table up. But having that sense of play where you can be like, hey, here's this unexpected thing, and having people being able to roll with it really pays off in that regard. And I forget why I brought that story up, but if you can remind me.
We were talking
had
about
said.
the chaos of the spell,
Right.
to ask the questions, and how you'd only get it once.
Mm-hmm.
Or the movie tweaked it and it worked. So
Right.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, where you just wind up having like it wound up like the funniness of it being like not you can only do it once and you just have the 5 times, which is what might normally happen at a table. Instead, we can do it as many times as we need to, and because it takes them so long, Chris Pine's character gets really frustrated with it,
Yeah.
and then you have that cliffhanger, which is almost funnier than the fact that the first time they did it, the guy's like just shuts them down with answering the questions precisely.
What was
But
great about that cliffhanger is everyone who stayed for a post-credit scene was like, is it gonna be? Everyone knew what it was gonna be, and like everyone was
yep,
like, "Yep, there we go. That was
and
it."
it was perfect. Yeah, because I stayed just on principle because of Marvel's trained you now to
Yeah,
just stay as far as you can, and I don't think it was at the end of the credits, but it was definitely at a point where it's like, aha, I see what you did there. That's
yeah,
funny.
yeah. The mid-credit scene seems to be more
Hmm.
popular outside of the Marvel stuff than the
Yeah.
post-credit scene.
But
Um,
speaking of credits, those credits were really cool.
yeah,
Just the whole animated process was really neat. Like I'm not gonna say I enjoyed it more than the whole movie, but it like I don't typically enjoy credits, and I really enjoyed those credits.
yeah. It was very entertaining to watch. I can't. It's been a while, so I'm trying to remember what all they look like. But I remember being impressed by them, like, okay, these aren't horrible. I also
Yeah,
remember like,
it reminded me of like if you've ever seen an illuminated manuscript where like the one letter is really big and has
yeah.
like a lot of stuff going on there. It's like they took that and were like, let's turn that into kind of a pop-up storybook type
Yeah.
thing and then paint it D&D.
So the other scene that was just pure chaos that I looked at the movie screen and I was like, I can't believe I'm seeing this right now was the uh, morbidly obese dragon.
Yeah.
I was like,
So
this is crazy.
it's
Why
very crazy.
why am I seeing this? And can I please have some more? Because
I just today actually read an article that was actually that dragon is actually a very deep lore piece
oh
of
really?
Dungeons and Dragons. Yeah, and I had no idea because I've never. I like he's a footnote in like from what I understand, he's a footnote in a second edition Drizzt Do'Arden splat book. So just to like clue you in a little bit, so splat books are basically books that get produced every once in a while that bring in new equipment or
Yeah.
ancestry options, various stuff like that. They just sort of splat lore and fill out the world a little bit. So he was like a footnote in a second edition thing in the late '90s that basically had something to do with there's a city of evil dwarves who keep a red dragon around to heat their forges, and when it gets to a certain age, red dragons are notoriously tyrannical and will probably try to take over the world, so they spoil it, pamper it, and when it gets to a certain age, they just kill it. And they have a new one. And
Yeah.
they've been doing this for years and years and years. And it's very exploitative and whatever. But in there was like a third edition and then another time that he's like come up and nothing's really done much with him. And then there was a book that was released, I think for fifth edition, that like drastically expanded his role. And there's a whole campaign that's set in the Underdark, which is that space underneath the world where all of the dark things live.
Yeah.
All of the Drow and the Duergar. Drow are dark elves. Duergar are gray dwarves. There's also Svirfneblin, which are a type of deep gnome.
Now you're just making up words.
I wish I wasn't to some extent, but also I'm glad that I know some of the words.
Yeah.
And so we're like supposedly this dragon lives under a gray dwarf city and feeds their forge for them. And there was this splat book that came out and a video game that was, I think, called Sword Coast Adventures, which is one of the settings actually in the world that we saw the movie in. The Sword Coast is an area. I think they actually mentioned it. They're like, "Oh yeah, would Forge have gone to the Sword Coast?" And they're like, "No, he's not going to leave Neverwinter," something along those lines.
Yeah.
But in this campaign, you have the red dragon egg that is supposed to replace him gets stolen. So you wind up like the players wind up in this weird um, middle ground where they're kind of caught between the two factions, one of whom has the egg, the other one needs the egg to sort of continue things forward. And then the red dragon himself, who is actually apparently really like he's not, I'm not going to say friendly exactly, but he's not a bestial scream in your face, blow fire at you, just eat you type. He's a dragon. They're very intelligent and
He's more
like
playful.
they want, yeah, kind of like they want their way, but he's not just coasting around eating things. Which the
Got
point
it.
of this article was like this guy has a really deep lore reason, and the movie to some degree was kind of a disservice to him, because you didn't get that at all. You just got this big, goofy looking obese dragon who can't really fly, and like he's really a tragic character who's never ever seen like the sky before.
Oh, wow.
Which you never get. And like I had no idea until I read this article earlier today, but it was eye opening to just be like, what even is that dragon? Because there's a moment where they're like, oh, it's so and so. He must have found a new den, and then they run from him, and it's clear that like either this dragon is famous or somebody's had a run-in with him before. Like they know who he is supposed to be, and so it's one of the pieces. Actually, the only reason that the movie like had me kind of go, okay, you could have kind of done more with this, was that there were a couple lore things that like are just sort of aren't explained. That
Okay.
you sort of need some insider info on, and like the red dragon is one that I didn't even know needed explanation until I read that thing today.
What
But
is
another,
what is the biggest one that you think the film did a disservice to by not explaining?
well, one of the ones that I like know right off the bat is the Red Wizards of Thay.
Okay.
And they do kind of explain that there's this one Red Wizard of Thay who kind of tries to go the whole necromancer route and infect his whole
Yeah.
people group and stuff like that. But like Red Wizards of Thay like get their power from like their tattoos or something like that, which is where like you cover your tattoos and you don't wear red if you're trying to pretend you're not one. And I feel like there's a better potential to sort of explain what a Red Wizard of Thay is. And then I don't think there's actually anything about the blade of a Red Wizard being particularly harmful. There may be, but that's not something that I remember having read anywhere. So like there's little pieces of things that are like that's probably rooted in a lore thing, but I've never heard that before.
Okay.
It would have been nice to have people like explain some of that a little better, but because I don't think Red Wizards of Thay are necessarily evil, although they're as the movie shows they're certainly vindictive to some extent. But it's a deep lore thing that's like, if you don't know Dungeons and Dragons, you don't have the clue what this bald-headed, tattooed,
Yeah.
red-wearing person is, or why they're important.
I think part of what I enjoyed about this movie was I'll go to a Marvel movie or I'll go to a DC movie and there'll be those deep pulls. And I'll be like, oh yeah, it's that. I know I might not know all the details. Like, I know
Sure.
I know who MODOK is.
Right, and there's a lot of people that probably don't know who
Yeah.
MODOK is, and I listened to the one episode where you and Josh talked about MODOK, and
Yeah.
I agree. I think it's the only way you can do MODOK is not take him seriously.
I think what I enjoyed about this was I was able to go in and have those gaps and not pick up on everything. So it wasn't like, okay, now I'm putting together the pieces of what I know
Yeah.
from outside of the movie. This is outside of my wheelhouse, but I was able to still enjoy it with all of knowing that stuff is there and knowing
Yeah.
that I'm not going to understand it. And that's fine. I don't need to know everything. I know a lot.
Yeah.
I don't need to know everything about every movie.
Yeah,
or
and
universe.
that was 100% something that I came out of the theater going is like, I wish they had taken time to explain some things. Like now in hindsight, I wish I knew about that dragon because it makes that dragon more interesting. But you don't need to know anything about
No.
that dragon. You don't need to know anything about D&D. Like the thing that I really walked away with was like, it's a great fantasy movie. It's even theoretically a great D&D movie. It's not a good tabletop role-playing movie. Like
No.
it's not particularly a good representation of that experience. But man, is it going to encourage people to try it.
Yeah. One of the things that I was fascinated by, just going into it and not realizing they were doing this, but there were just moments in the film, and I was like, "Oh, they're doing a spoof of like the Lord of the Rings films or the Princess
Mhm.
Bride." Like they pull a lot from the fantasy genre, like Game of Thrones, and
Yeah.
they pull a lot stylistically from that, and they do it to like poke fun at it, but also in a
Mhm.
respectful way. And I really like that they struck that balance, because there could have been a way
Yep.
where this is just a like epic movie type style
Sure.
where they're
Where you're
making
just
fun of it.
lampooning things constantly. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but they were very subtle about it and how they chose it. And there were some shots that reminded me a lot of Game Night with how they set it up.
Mhm.
Because Game Night is very particular with what they do with the camera. Like there's one shot where a car pulls into a like a shopping center parking lot, and it looks like a game piece going to a new spot on the
Oh,
board.
that's cool.
So
Yeah.
um, there were some moments in here that I can't remember what they were, but I was like, oh, that was cool. Like I
Mhm.
appreciated that. So
Some of the special effects and the stunt work particularly was incredible.
yeah,
Um and I don't think I had the awareness in watching the movie of like, oh, they're kind of harkening back to these other properties, but it does make sense that you say that because it's very typical in various tabletop games because it's basically a framework for you to tell stories with your friends.
yeah.
It's like, well, what type of story do you want to tell? Do you want to tell a Lord of the Rings type story? Do you want to tell a Princess Bride type story? Like you can.
Hmm.
It's one of the things that I love about the medium.
Yeah. Is there anything else you wanted to go over about the movie before we start wrapping this up?
Um, yes.
Okay.
A thing that, and this is not going to necessarily mean much to you. Um, the lack of iconic spells and creatures
Okay.
was actually very, I don't want to say disappointing, but it was interesting. So when you think Dungeons and Dragons, typically one of the things that you think of is a beholder, which is that big floaty monster with all the eye stalks and the one big eye right in the middle.
Okay.
And it's a registered like Wizards of the Coast, Hasbro, Dungeons and Dragons thing. It's like their thing. You can't copy that anywhere else, and it's nowhere to be seen in the movie. Which hopefully means it's in like the next one. But you know they have a displacer beast that plays a huge role in the whole maze thing. That's what that black panther thing with the two tentacles is.
Okay.
And they handled that super well.
That's the sequence I missed. The whole maze sequence is
You
what
missed the maze.
I
Oh
missed the
man.
maze.
Yeah, because the other really iconic like creature that they run into is the gelatinous cube, and that's in the maze. A gelatinous cube is basically just a big cube of acidic stuff that like if you wind up in the cube, you get burned to death. And they use that as like an escape means to get out of the arena. But like it's an iconic creature. It was really cool to see it there. The other on the spell side of things, the interesting thing was that the one spell that everybody knows, I feel like from Dungeons and Dragons, is Magic Missile,
Okay.
and it's basically a spell where you cast it and 3 force bolts fly out, and they've sort of intentionally shied away from portraying it in movies and video games in the past because one of the things they don't want to do is copyright your imagination because it's a spell. It should work how you want it to work. But they brought up time stop and counterspell, which counterspell is arguably, if not like if Magic Missile is the most iconic spell, counterspell is probably the second most, followed by Fireball.
Okay.
And both of those got like major screen time. Like it's a plot point for that time stop, and then that counterspell later on. So it's just interesting to me that like there's no Magic Missile, and it was kind of fun to sit there and try to sort of break down the like magic duel that happens toward the end of the movie. If did you see that part? Did you sleep through that part?
Uh, who's it between?
It's technically the fight with Sofina where everybody's kind of piling on, but there's a definite moment where it's mostly Simon and her
I think I
going
missed
head to
that.
head.
I think I missed that.
There's a really neat moment where she's got like a magic hand that is, it looks disgusting. It looks like a bloody mess with like pointed fingernails, and it's coming at somebody, and then he casts a different spell that basically animates a bunch of rocks that come up in its own hand, and they kind of fight back and forth. And at some point I would love to actually just sit down with somebody who is as big of a nerd, probably more so than I, and just be like, so what spells do you think like we see in that chunk of time? Because I actually thought at one point in there, like, maybe that was a magic missile. But one of the things, again, that the movie, and this is another reason that I say it's not a great example of tabletop role playing, is spell casting, quote unquote, in the game requires certain things like components. So you have to make a vocal component, you have to say something, and you have to make a somatic, which is like a gesture. And that's a piece that, from a storytelling perspective, makes sense that you wouldn't include necessarily in a movie, because it's going to be it's going to take away if you're, every time you cast a spell, the guy has to throw, like, think of like when Peter Parker in the first Tobey Maguire movie is trying to figure out how to do the web slinging thing, and he's like, go web, fly. It's like exactly that type of thing where you have somebody making hand motions and saying something, only
Shazam!
they're actually keyed. Exactly. Like, and it makes sense to a certain extent to remove that from the movie, but it would be really fascinating to actually sit down with somebody who also knows kind of the spells and be like, so what, let's like break this down maybe and just actually see what happens. Because if there is a magic missile, that would be cool. But like one of the first things my Sunday group was like, is there a magic missile in the movie? And I had to go, no, I don't think there was. There was a time stop and there was a counter spell at least twice, but there's no magic missile. And for like a true diehard fan who's played a lot, that might be a disappointment. I don't really know.
But yeah, it makes me wonder if they're saving that for the sequel. But when this comes out on video, like, I'm really wondering if there's going to be like an annotated, like, pop-up video type footnotes that come up with everything that like give you a little bit more lore.
Man, that would be fun. Yeah, because one of the little details that I found out in writing the spoiler review was that John Francis Daley and Jonathan Goldstein made the actors play Dungeons and Dragons together
as their characters, right?
Yeah, and they like drew little things from those interactions to actually put into the movie. So it would be fun if there's like even moments where they're like, this little thing is something that Chris Pine, did at the table and like got included. That would be,
or just like the actual sessions of them playing together.
Yeah,
cool.
There was some question as to whether it had gotten recorded, because of course with like Critical Role and various other properties, like there's a big market for like watching people play Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah. So the movie was #1 at the box office this past weekend. With a budget of $150 million, it is at $72 million right now worldwide. I think it's fair to say I think this will get a sequel, because even if the box office numbers aren't there, this is a production for Hasbro. So if this ups their sales of the books and of the game merchandise, then they'll definitely make a sequel. Like, they're in it for the long.
I think it will. Yeah. Especially so you not being a gamer wouldn't have any knowledge of this, but Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro actually like had a major stumble early in this year, right at the tail of last year, where they sort of tried to like redefine one of the things that lets people create content under the 5th edition banner, which led to a bunch of people going like, what else is out there? What other editions are available? And the timing of this movie was perfect, I think, to sort of go like, we're not like, I don't even really think they addressed that officially, other than kind of how they tried to cover for it in like January. Like, I think there hasn't really been much since then, but this is a great step for them in terms of bringing in new player bases and selling those books and stuff, because you have a bunch of people whose friends are like, hey, check out this movie, it's a good movie.
Yeah.
And they're like, wow, can you really do all this stuff in D&D? And it's like, well, yeah, to some extent you absolutely can. So I think you're absolutely correct. I think we'll see a sequel.
And on a side note, we had a new board game shop open in town here where I live, right across the street from my apartment. So I was like, this is going to be dangerous. But I went in there. They've got a bunch of like Magic the Gathering cards, and so it's a lot of like card games. They also have some RPG stuff. So
yeah,
I'm gonna have to check them out more. So
sure.
And until they pay me to be name dropped on the show, I'm not going to drop their names. But yeah, I really hope we get a sequel with this. I want to see more of what this directing duo does, because this was a great follow up to Game Night. Please check it out. I think you'll enjoy it.
I will if I can find it. I'll watch it. Yeah.
If you have game nights regularly like I do, like there are some fun things in there.
Are you a board gamer?
Yes, I do.
I didn't think I knew this.
I have. My big game that I have the most of is a deck building game called Marvel Legendary.
Okay.
So I've got like at this point 10 expansions for that, plus the base game.
That's where deck builders make their money. Yeah.
And I have all like all my cards sleeved and like get the heroes that I want. I'll buy a whole expansion just for one hero. So that's the big one. We also do a lot of Betrayal at the House on the Hill.
Yep. I have a copy of that. Yep.
I've got a whole bunch of like so many monopolies. Like but we do a monthly game night where I keep getting pulled away from it because of Victims and Villians stuff. Like I miss it for Creature Feature. I'm going to miss it for the Film Fest. So,
with the Film Fest, I have just a bag of board games that I carry around in the back of my car.
Oh, nice.
And I can throw the one game that I have that is sort of like, if you want to experience a Dungeons and Dragons-esque experience without the longevity and the commitment of a campaign, I have a game that sort of captures a little bit of that.
Okay.
I could throw that in there too. We'll talk.
Yeah, we'll talk. I think I have like the reason I don't take Legendary out so much is I have it in boxes. Like I can't contain it in one box. I have it all in a bag though, so maybe I could bring that down and we can play.
I had a housemate who he bought, I believe, like all of the Arkham Asylum games and all the expansions and so forth, and they take up a lot of space. And one of the things that he did was he like went out and bought an old like leather style like valise or suitcase and like condensed everything so that it all fit into this one suitcase. And I was like, that's a neat idea for a game that has lots of pieces. Like I don't think I can do that with all of my Pathfinder books simply because they're all books.
Yeah.
But PDFs exist for a reason. So, you have access to your whole library off of one device.
The only role-playing game that I have a book for is I found it at a comic book shop in like the clearance section, and it was a Smallville role-playing game.
Yo.
So
that's fun.
And then I got it home. I was like, oh my God, this smells like, it was like all musky, like it was left in a damn basement.
Mildewy or something.
I was like, okay, well, let's just leave this in the car a bit to kill whatever is in it, and then it was fine. I think I still have it somewhere. Okay. So
cool.
What I would love to do the next time that Victims does a live stream is just in some abbreviated form get a bunch of us together and do like a Critical Role type thing where we all just play our characters and do a mini adventure. So I think that'd be a lot of fun.
I've kind of low-key offered to Josh, and I just think Josh isn't particularly interested, but Josh doesn't have to be involved.
Well, you and I are both on the board, so we can get Howell on board.
Yeah, and
I
I
think
think we could after the movie.
yeah.
I think we could. But you had mentioned an interest in maybe doing some kind of a character creation thing, and I'm not going to do that because
Yeah.
that's a lot of time. But the one question that I like to ask people who have never really played a fantasy thing before is just to sort of kind of figure out what direction to kind of aim them is like, what if you could pick like 2 or 3 characters that, if you could be in kind of this realm, which characters would they be? Like Aragorn or Chris Pine's Ed or whatever.
Um. So from like any fantasy genre.
Yeah, yeah, anything
Okay.
at
All
all.
right. So I'll give you three.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm gonna go Chris Pine in this as
Mm-hmm.
one. Um. Pippin from Lord of the Rings.
Sure. Yep.
And let's see what
It's okay.
else.
I realialize it's kind of putting you
Um,
on the spot, but it's a
and
fun
and
exercise.
and a little bit of Inigo Montoya. You killed my
Sure.
father, prepare to die.
Yeah,
Like,
I know it. Yep.
yeah, I think that
So if
like the suaveness, the
yep.
the chaos of Chris Pine, and
Mm-hmm.
what about Second Breakfast?
So if we were playing Pathfinder, I don't know. I'll go Pathfinder terms because I'm more familiar with those.
Okay,
And the class may exist in 5th edition. I don't know. It's been so long since I played. The class that I would recommend is a swashbuckler,
okay,
which is pretty much what it says on the tin. You have the charisma, you have kind of the fancy sword fighting, you have some of those opportunities for one-liners, and then you can play around with the ancestry and such to sort of figure out, what do I want to play an elf? Do I want to play a half elf? Do I want to play something weirder than that?
yeah,
Do I want to just be a human? How do I want to approach this?
okay,
But that's kind of the direction I would be like, you might want to try this because
okay.
it kind of has some of that.
That sounds right up my alley. So,
Mm-hmm.
how about you? Who are your three?
I've been in this for a long time, so at this point I just have a bunch of fun character concepts that I'm sitting on.
Okay,
One of the ones that I'm playing right now is a guy. His name is Sir Tor. At least that's what he tells everybody. His name's actually Terrence, and he really really wants to be a knight, but he's terrible at it.
okay,
And when he gets very frustrated with himself, and if he doesn't manage to hit somebody or gets hit by somebody, his reaction is to kind of fly off the handle and go into a barbarian rage. He's a barbarian. He just pretends he's not.
okay,
Um, and that's been a fun one. And the other one that I've been playing actively for a little while is that deaf halfling ranger named Farley,
okay.
who has like a hearing dog and lots of other fun
That
stuff
one
like
sounds
But
like fun. Like I want to see you
Yeah.
play that at some point.
It's entertaining. He's got a Scottish accent, and some of that is because I learned in researching the character that like it's possible to lose your hearing over time, and you where there's some of that stereotypical like if you've ever interacted with a person that has struggles with deafness or what have you, sometimes they have speech impediments that come in as at the same time, like especially if they were born not being able to hear. But if you can hear and you lose it over time, supposedly you don't lose that ability. And to some extent, actually, there's a role player who actually was an inspiration for it. Her name is Alicia Marie. She does costume design for a bunch of movies, but she was born deaf, had never explored the hobby, and then in like 2018 or 2019 got cochlear implants and suddenly could hear and was playing in all of these role-playing games. And so I sort of explored that as like, what is, if you lose your hearing over time but you don't lose the ability to speak, like what does that look like?
Yeah.
And with role-playing games specifically, it's a fascinating opportunity to kind of play something that's not you, that's outside of your experience, to kind of explore things. One of the craziest like experience I've ever had in playing was playing a heavily like Asian martial art inspired female sword wielding monk. and it was crazy because on the one hand I'm playing a woman, but on the other it's from a completely different culture, so I kind of get to explore what that's like, and it's very different from anything I would ever experience, as a straight white man from the West.
Yeah.
So it's role playing games generally are just fantastic for like being able to see the perspective of somebody else that's completely different from you. I've never been deaf, but I've played a deaf character now, and while it doesn't translate exactly, it does give me some degree more of compassion, I think, for
Mm-hmm.
folks that can't hear. So I'm going to
Yeah.
be more patient and not get frustrated. Hopefully, stuff like that.
Awesome.
But
Well, thank you so much for joining me with this episode.
yeah,
You were very passionate about being on this one, so I appreciate that. Thank you for joining me. I almost said joining us, but thank you for filling in for Josh.
I do wish Josh had been here because it would have been fun to talk to both of you. But I do enjoy
Yeah.
getting to talk about a hobby that is near and dear to me. So
Yeah. So love to have you back again sometime to talk about
would love to be back
something
sometime.
else. So
Yeah.
with that being said, that does it for this edition of Brilliant But Lazy. We will have another edition here in 2 weeks, probably. I'm not sure what that's going to look like because of the Horrific Hope Film Festival being hosted by Victims and Villains in Winchester, Virginia at the
Yes,
Alamo
sir.
Draft House. So if you haven't bought your tickets yet, do so now. Come out. We will both be there, so it'll be a lot of
We will
fun.
both be there. Yeah.
We'll get to meet face to face. It'll be awesome.
Yep. I'm looking forward to it.
So we will have another episode here in April, but if by chance we don't, our next episode will be our Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 review with me and Josh. So stay tuned for that coming up here sooner rather than later. Cam, thank you again. For Brilliant But Lazy, I'm Alan, and we will see you next time.